She was mistaken for the help at a vineyard wedding by a billionaire best man with more charm than awareness. But what began as an awkward insult turned into a slow-burning story of second chances, folding chairs, and a love that neither of them saw coming. A single glass of sparkling water became the start of everything he never knew he needed, and she never planned to allow. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us where are you watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The vineyard glowed under the soft light of the late afternoon sun. Rows of green vines stretched over the hills like waves frozen in time. The scent of lavender and ripe grapes danced through the breeze, filling the air with warmth and ease. The sky above was painted in soft gold, the perfect setting for a summer wedding. Naomi Bennett stood near the long banquet table, adjusting the flowers one last time. She gently shifted a peony in the centerpiece to the left, then stepped back and smiled. The pale pink fabric of her bridesmaid dress caught the sunlight. Shimmering as she moved, it hugged her frame gracefully. A perfect blend of elegance and ease. She brushed a curl from her face, her focus fixed on making sure everything looked just right before the ceremony began. The bride, her best friend Tessa, hurried by with a fluttering veil and whispered a quick "Thank you." Naomi waved her off with a playful grin, telling her to go get married already. Tessa giggled and disappeared behind the archway, where the string quartet had begun tuning their instruments. Guests started taking their seats in rows of white chairs. Murmurs of excitement filled the air. Naomi took a deep breath. Everything felt in place. Every detail was perfect. The vineyard, the music, the people she loved, all of it coming together like a dream. The heir of a Julian Reed stepped onto the path like he owned the land itself, tall and sharply dressed in a dark navy suit, sunglasses covering his eyes, phone in one hand, the other adjusting his cufflink as if it were a habit. His presence made heads turn, but his attention was elsewhere. He looked out over the rows of guests, scanning without much interest, until his gaze landed on Naomi. Was leaning over a table, her back turned, adjusting a napkin that had blown slightly off-center. Without hesitation, Julian walked toward her, pausing just behind her and speaking in a low, clear voice. "Excuse me, can you grab me a sparkling water? No lemon." Naomi froze for a second, the soft music and chatter of the crowd still humming in the background. She turned slowly, confusion flickering in her eyes as she met his face. His sunglasses still on, he looked her up and down, clearly mistaking her for someone working the event. With a calm and steady tone, Naomi replied, "I'm not staff, I'm a bridesmaid." Julian blinked, then quickly pulled off his sunglasses. His expression shifted from annoyed to surprised to slightly embarrassed. He opened his mouth, stammered something about the dress, or the way she had been arranging things. Trying to explain, Naomi gave him a tight smile, eyes cool but not unkind. She didn't wait for a full apology. Instead, she turned, walked over to a nearby tray, picked up a glass of sparkling water, and returned to him with a graceful curtsy. "No lemon," she said sweetly, then turned and walked away. The sting of his mistake settled in instantly. Julian watched her go, realizing just how badly he had misjudged the situation. She wasn't just stunning, she had a presence, a quiet confidence that filled the space she walked in. And now he had reduced her to someone fetching drinks. Stood awkwardly near the back of the seating area as the ceremony began, trying not to glance at her too much, but failing. His mind kept replaying the moment, the way she held her head high, the way she shut him down without raising her voice. It was the most memorable thing that had happened to him all week. The groom, Tessa's fiancé, joined him briefly, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Nice going," he muttered with a grin. "You just insulted her best friend." Julian winced. "She's a bridesmaid." He asked more to himself than anyone else. "Naomi," the groom said, "runs a non-profit in Oakland. Does a lot for kids and teens. She's sharp. Not someone you can impress with money." Julian nodded quietly. That much was already clear. The ceremony moved forward with grace and beauty. Vows were spoken under a golden arch. Soft clapping filled the vineyard as the couple kissed. Naomi stood just behind the bride, her smile wide and eyes glowing with joy. She didn't look back at Julian once, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the vineyard. The celebration continued with soft music and laughter. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, and still Julian kept finding himself glancing in her direction. Didn't know why he cared so much about that first moment. Maybe it was the way she carried herself. Maybe it was the fact that for once, someone didn't try to charm him or flatter him. Maybe it was the rare feeling of being humbled by someone who didn't even try. Whatever it was, he knew one thing for sure. He had to fix it, but the question hung in the air like the drifting scent of lavender. How do you apologize to someone who didn't ask for your attention, but earned your respect, and just maybe, that respect would be the beginning of something unexpected? 3 days had passed since the vineyard wedding, but Julian Reed couldn't stop thinking about her. The bridesmaid in the pink dress who had handed him a glass of sparkling water with more grace than he deserved. Naomi Bennett, the name replayed in his mind like a quiet song he couldn't shake. He had made a mistake. A big one, but not just because he assumed she was staff. The real mistake was assuming her presence didn't matter. And that assumption stayed with him long after the music faded and the vineyard returned to silence. And the third evening, after drafting and deleting more emails than he'd like to admit, he sent a message with no attachments, no assistant-approved subject line. Just a few words he hoped came across right. Subject: a second chance to get it right. Message: Hi Naomi. I haven't stopped thinking about how poorly I handled our first meeting. If you're open to it, I'd like to take you to dinner. No assumptions, no tuxedos. Just a chance to talk with the woman who clearly made an impression. Julia. Naomi stared at the email, her phone resting on her lap as the evening light filtered through her apartment window. She read the message once, then again, unsure if she wanted to roll her eyes or laugh. Most men in his position didn't apologize. They moved on. They disappeared into jets and corner offices. She didn't expect to hear from him, but here he was, asking not for forgiveness, but for a dinner. She typed back one sentence, short and simple: one dinner. No suits, no speeches, no apologizing with your bank account, just conversation. The restaurant he picked was tucked into a quiet side street in San Francisco. No flashing lights, no red carpets, just warm lighting, brick walls, and the faint sound of jazz drifting from a speaker in the corner. Julian arrived early, wearing a navy sweater and clean jeans, no tie, no sunglasses, no phone in his hand, just nerves. He stood when Naomi walked in, and for a second he couldn't speak. She wore a mustard yellow dress and a simple pair of earrings. Her hair framed her face in soft curls, and she looked like sunlight on purpose. You look incredible, he finally said. And it didn't feel like a line, it felt honest. You look. She paused with a grin. Shockingly normal. They sat in a booth by the window, ordered a bottle of wine and shared a few appetizers. The waiter smiled politely, refilled their water, and left them to their silence. Julian cleared his throat. I wasn't sure if you'd actually come. I wasn't sure either, she said. But I figured, why not give the tech billionaire a shot at a real conversation? He smiled at that, a little sheepishly. Fair enough. Naomi told him about Bright Steps, the youth nonprofit she had built from her mom's garage. Starting with just 3 teenagers and 1 folding table, now they served over 200 students a year, offering college prep, mentorship, and workshops on everything from leadership to mental health. Spoke with energy and pride, her eyes lighting up as she talked about the kids, their struggles, their wins, and the long nights that made it all worth it. Julian listened, truly listened, his elbows on the table, his focus entirely on her. When she finished, he said softly, You built something that actually changes lives. That's incredible. Not all impact has to be massive, she replied. Sometimes helping one kid get into college is enough. He nodded. I used to measure everything in user numbers, in graphs, but lately, I've been wondering if one person could matter more than 1,000 downloads. She raised an eyebrow. That a speech or a compliment? Both, he said with a small laugh. He talked about their childhoods. Julian's early years spent learning code from his mom, how he dropped out of college to chase an idea, how lonely success could feel when you're always building something for other people to use, but not always for yourself. Naomi listened, then teased him. Classic billionaire origin story. I'm just waiting for the part where your childhood pet teaches you about resilience. Julian laughed. His name was Comet. He was a goldfish, and he jumped out of the bowl the day I pitched to my first investor. I took it as a very dramatic sign. They laughed together, and the tension between them began to melt, replaced by a slow-growing ease. Julian became quiet for a moment, then said, "The reason you stuck with me that day, more than your speech, more than the dress, was the way you stood your ground. You didn't flinch. You didn't soften just to make me feel better." Naomi tilted her head. "When you're a black woman walking into rooms where people don't expect you to belong, you learn early how to hold your space." He looked at her and said, "I admire that." They finished dessert, shared a lavender creme brulee she'd been hesitant to order, but ended up loving. Afterward they walked along the marina, the city lights flickering on the water, the air crisp and full of salt. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, and Julian offered her his coat without saying a word. She accepted. I'd stopped walking, turned to face her, and said quietly, "Can I be honest?" "Depends," she replied with a smile. "How honest are we talking?" "I asked you out," he said, "because I've never met anyone like you, and because I think you make me want to be a better version of myself." She blinked, not expecting that. "So no suits," he said with a half smile. "No fancy apologies, just me showing up." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You keep talking like that, and I might have to believe you." They stood like that, not quite touching, not quite apart, a moment suspended in something new, and as the night wrapped around them like a quiet song, neither of them said what they were both thinking. This could be something real, something worth trying. Saturday morning arrived with a soft breeze and clear skies over Oakland. The community center buzzed with energy as volunteers set up tables, strung colorful banners, and arranged folding chairs in neat rows. Laughter echoed from the corner where teens practiced their spoken word poems, while the smell of cinnamon rolls and strong coffee filled the air. Naomi Bennett stood in the center of it all, clipboard in one hand, her other hand gesturing as she gave directions with calm confidence. She wore black jeans and a bright coral blouse that brought out the warm undertones in her skin. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, and she moved through the space with purpose. Every step measured, every word thoughtful. Today was BrightStep's annual fundraiser, a day that meant everything to her. It wasn't about suits or speeches or big checks. It was about the kids, their stories, their dreams, their belief that the world could still open doors for them. She glanced toward the front entrance for a moment, her expression unreadable. It had been 2 days since she'd last heard from Julian Reed. Their dinner had ended on a quiet but promising note, but silence after something that felt real always left a question hanging in the air. She hadn't expected him to show up here, not really. And then the glass doors swung open. Julian walked in wearing jeans and a dark hoodie, 3 pizza boxes stacked in his arms, and a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. A few heads turned. One kid near the sound booth gasped. Someone whispered his name, but Julian didn't seem fazed. His eyes searched the room until they landed on Naomi. Blinked in surprise, momentarily frozen. He lifted the boxes slightly and said, "Got a delivery for BrightSteps. Comes with extra pepperoni and a side of humility." Naomi tried not to smile, but failed. "You actually came," she said as she walked over. "Of course," he replied. "I figured helping set up folding chairs might be more valuable than trying to impress you with another rooftop dinner." "You brought juice boxes too," she noted, pointing to the bag in his other hand, "and napkins," he added. Never underestimate napkins at a youth fundraiser. Within minutes, the kids had surrounded him, some asking about his company, others just happy he brought snacks. Julian knelt to help a 10-year-old girl with her poster. complimented a boy's sneakers, even played ping pong with one of the quieter teens. The kind who usually kept to himself. Naomi watched all of it from across the room, arms crossed loosely, her face softening. She hadn't asked him to show up, hadn't needed him to prove anything, but there he was, blending in, showing up, no spotlight, no agenda. Later that afternoon, as the center buzzed with poetry, music, and laughter, Naomi stepped outside for a moment of air. The garden behind the building was peaceful, with small benches and wildflowers blooming along the fence. She stood quietly, letting the sun warm her shoulders. Julian joined her a few moments later, 2 bottles of water in hand. He offered her one without a word. She took it and said quietly, "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." They stood side by side, the quiet between them now filled with something softer. "I found out about your donation," she said, her voice steady. $500,000. He looked down, then met her eyes. "I didn't do it to win points," he said. "I did it because your program matters, because those kids matter, and because you made me want to be the kind of person who supports things that really matter." She studied his face for a moment. "You can't fix things with money, I know," he replied. "That's why I'm here, with juice boxes and napkins, learning that not everything valuable comes with a price tag." Her expression softened. "You're different than I thought." "Good different?" he asked, a hopeful smile tugging at his lips. "Frustratingly good." She answered. He laughed quietly, then said, "I want to show you something." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be nervous?" "Only a little," he said as he gently pulled a soft blindfold from his pocket. She chuckled. "Don't tell me this is some romantic comedy moment. No boomboxes involved, I promise," he said as he guided her gently through the building. They took an elevator up to the rooftop, the blindfold still on when he removed it. She gasped. The rooftop was simple but beautiful. String lights hanging above a small table set for 2 mismatched chairs, a soft blanket over the railing, candles flickering, and music playing from a portable speaker in the corner. She turned to him. "You did this. Every candle, every chair," he said. "Even Googled how to plan a romantic rooftop dinner without looking like I'm overcompensating." She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "It's beautiful. I didn't want to impress you with money," he said. "I wanted to impress you with effort." They sat at the small table, sharing sandwiches. One was a peanut butter and jelly he attempted to make himself. The other was her favorite wrap from a nearby deli. They talked about small things, simple things, and for the first time, the walls between them began to fall. Julian told her about his mother, how she taught him coding when he was still in middle school, about how empty success felt when it wasn't shared with anyone who mattered. Naomi told him about her mom, how she kept the program running when funding was low, how she learned strength in silence as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Julian leaned in slightly, his voice low. "May I?" Naomi looked at him, then smiled, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "Not yet," she whispered. "Earn it," he nodded. Challenge accepted. And in that moment, under the string lights and soft music, something real began to bloom. Not rushed, not forced, just quietly possible. A year had passed since the day Naomi handed Julian a glass of sparkling water with no lemon. Now the vineyard looked much the same as it had then, golden light spilling over the hills, rows of grapes swaying gently in the summer breeze. The same white chairs lined the lawn, the same music floated through the air, but everything felt different. Naomi walked slowly across the stone path in a soft rose dress, the fabric catching the light just like it had the first time. But this time she wasn't arranging centerpieces or checking napkins. She was a guest. Her role now was simple and joy. The moment, hold the hand of the man beside her, and maybe, just maybe, believe in things. She used to roll her eyes at. Julian stood beside her in a linen shirt and relaxed slacks, his arms slipping gently around her waist as they watched the ceremony unfold. He leaned in close and whispered, "You still take my breath away." In pink, she smiled and whispered back, You didn't even recognize me in pink the first time. I did, he said. I just didn't realize you were a miracle in disguise. Naomi laughed quietly, resting her head on his shoulder for a moment. The vows being spoken at the altar felt like echoes of their own journey mistakes, forgiveness, learning how to see someone fully and choosing them anyway after the ceremony. They joined the crowd at the reception under strings of lights, the same kind that had once lit up the rooftop dinner, where Julian first started to understand what love might actually look like. They danced slowly, not speaking, letting the rhythm carry them in gentle circles. Bride tossed the bouquet. Guests laughed and shouted, and Julian leaned closer, his lips brushing Naomi's ear as he asked softly, "Do you still think fairy tales are just for kids?" Naomi looked up at him, her eyes warm and calm. "Not anymore," she said. Their lips met in a kiss that was quiet but full, not the kind meant to dazzle a crowd, but the kind that settled into the heart like a promise. When they pulled apart, they didn't need to say anything else. 6 months later, in Oakland, the new Bright Step Center opened its doors for the first time, a renovated 2-story building on the corner of 45th and Adeline, filled with light, books, and the sound of children learning and laughing. Murals wrapped the walls, painted by local artists, each one telling stories of strength, culture, and community. Naomi walked the halls with her clipboard, her expression focused but soft. She wore jeans and a bright yellow sweater, her hair tied back loosely. Volunteers moved through the space setting up the new classrooms. Kids explored the fresh painted art room, and upstairs the new STEM lab buzzed with excitement. Julian stepped in through the front doors, holding 2 coffees. Dressed simply in khaki pants and a white button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up, he walked over to Naomi, grinning. "I brought bribes," he said, holding out one of the drinks. "Oat milk latte, just like you like it." She took the cup and gave him a teasing smile. "You're late," fashionably, he replied, then added, "And I had to wrestle a barista for this." They walked down the hallway together, their hands brushing occasionally, the building around them buzzing with life and hope. Julian looked around and said, "Every time I walk in here, it feels like watching you build the future." Naomi looked at him, her expression softening. "And every time you say things like that, I wonder if your billionaire heart isn't all spreadsheets and stock options." He laughed gently. "Only for you." He sighed as a student ran out of a classroom shouting that the printer jammed again. Naomi sighed and turned. "Third time this week," she muttered, then looked at Julian. "Tech genius, want to help? With great coding power comes great printer responsibility," he said as he followed her. Still holding his coffee that evening, in their apartment full of books, plants, and half-solved puzzles, Naomi curled up on the couch in her favorite robe. Julian was in the kitchen, struggling to bake cornbread without burning it. The room smelled like cinnamon, vanilla, and something slightly over Dinesh. Looked at the photo on the mantel. It showed the 2 of them at the vineyard wedding, caught mid-laugh, a flower tucked behind her ear. Beside it was another frame, a small black and white ultrasound photo that made her heart swell every time she saw it. Julian walked over, flower on his cheek, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. He kissed her shoulder and asked quietly, "You ready for this next chapter?" Naomi leaned back into him, her hand resting on her growing belly, her voice low but sure. "With you, always." They sat like that in the quiet, no music, no rush, just warmth and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, life had its own way of writing love stories. Not perfect ones, not easy ones, but real ones, the kind built on mistakes and laughter and second chance, because sometimes the best kind of love doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with a misunderstanding, a sparkling water without lemon, and someone who keeps showing up until they finally get it right.